I'm back to talking about the deepest acceptance of ourselves, of whatever arises within us. I've done a few videos recently, and all the ones I'm doing outside I'm not really enjoying at the moment, because I wanted to offer a kind of deeper intimacy, if you like, a deeper insight. As you know, if you watch these videos, they're all kind of made up on the spot. I don't really know. I just have a vague kind of idea of where we want, where this might kind of head, but actually it unfolds in the making of it itself. And I think that keeps in and stays true to a certain authenticity and certain honesty that, you know, in many ways is what this channel and what I'm all about. You know, maybe there's some healing in that honesty and in that authenticity, because it creates a kind of intimacy that maybe, you know, you or some people can pick up on. I'm not trying to sell anything, I'm not trying to do anything particularly. I don't even really know why I do this. I just do it because there's a rising up within me that is an extension of the poetry that I do, and actually an extension of the music that I used to write and still do sometimes, because even that music is actually really quite soft, and in many ways it's not performance music. It's really quite intimate and quite heart-based, because everything that I do, you know, does seem to come from the heart and beingness. You know, it hasn't got much force in it. It's like a sort of a rising up of love, I think. You know, that's the best I can say it. And the more that I've cleared over the years the vessel of the heart and the beingness, and decluttered myself and detoxified myself even on the physical level, and certainly dealt with all of the emotional baggage that I was carrying around in my own life, the more I've been able to kind of give a voice to it, even though, you know, even though at times it is kind of almost difficult. You know, it's like life is painful. You know, expression is painful, honesty is painful, authenticity is difficult, because we live in a fake reality. We live in a phony world. We live in a mask-covered world, you know, where, you know, the zeitgeist, the general sense, the general feeling, the general vibration is that we need to wear the mask of self in order to, you know, survive in a hostile world, or to fit in, or to get what we want. And this is, you know, part of the show, really. It's part of the way the matrix, for want of a better term, kind of works. And some people wear those masks of self, you know, better than others. Some people wear them, you know, and make a great success of their lives, you know, apparently, or achieve fame. And, you know, there are a million different variations on the human theme, you know, but there are a lot of people who aren't comfortable existentially, emotionally, mentally, whatever level, with the wearing of that mask, and feel a kind of push-pull of wanting to take the mask of falseness, let's call it that, the mask of falseness, of wanting to take that mask off, you know. But, you know, that's an easy thing to say, you know, and not an easy thing to do, if you like, because it has all sorts of repercussions and implications and consequences. But the true spiritual path, certainly as far as I'm concerned, is not the, you know, the way of methods of finding new ways of being a human in this world, or, you know, getting a better mask, or fixing the problem. You know, although these things, you know, as in therapies or as in, you know, I don't know, self-healing or things like that can be very kind of useful. That's not what this conversation is about. This is about taking off the mask. This is about, you know, undoing all that has been done up. You know, this is about, you know, seeing the reasons why we feel we have to wear a mask in this world, and recognizing how much discomfort it creates, and why that has maybe led to so many existential, emotional, mental, you know, psychological problems for us and in the world, and seeing if we can find ways of actually unmasking ourselves. And I think one of the, you know, key kind of messages in a way, or key pointers or key insights, is that despite the fact that, you know, we desire to take off the mask, despite the fact that we want to live in our authenticity, a maskless, a kind of naked way, a direct way of being in the world, it really is not as easy as that. And we prefer, and I know many people, you know, kind of dance around the inevitability of what that actually means. And the message that I have, or the word that I have, is it is going to take a lot of courage. It takes courage. It takes a kind of fortitude. You know, we can't just jump straight to the great acceptance of the nakedness of our being. You know, it maybe we can. I mean, if you can, that's great. But generally speaking, there are kind of almost levels of decompression that we have to go through. There are levels of kind of unplugging. Now, I'm not a method kind of person, so I can't speak that that's not a level 1, level 2, level 3. We don't do levels in this teaching work with a Moda. We're like just trying to cut straight to the bottom line. But there needs to be a recognition, you know, that you know, once you've kind of reached the bottom line, if you like, and there's nothing more to hide behind, and there's no more strategies of, you know, of how to be in the world, and there's just the raw bones of what is, then it's kind of easy to speak from the raw kind of truth, you know. But there needs to be a compassionate recognition that it actually, you know, it does take time, it does take patience, it takes a lot of failure, it takes a lot of humility, it takes a lot of blood, sweat and tears, yeah, to transform. Transformation, it is a struggle. It can be a struggle that we go through, you know, but and that struggle, I'm not disparaging that struggle. I think the struggle is almost a necessary component for us, because struggle creates the energy, yeah, the energy that we need. We need energy to transform. Transformation doesn't just come when the la because I choose it. You know, transformation comes because there is a calling for a rebirth, a transformation, a regeneration. This kind of rebirth is part of the journey, because something old in us, that old way that we had, the way of the mask, the way of the kind of false self, the way of the hiding self, the way of the victim self, the way of the aggrandized self, the way of, you know, strategizing our way through life, yeah? That way has to die, has to come undone. It just has to come undone somehow, yeah? And that's, you know, some people, it comes undone kind of in a flash of insight, or a flash of, you know, awakening, or a flash of realization. Still, it has to be lived. Yeah, make no mistake there. It still has to be a lived experience, and the human experience is still going to show up in certain areas of life. It really is, usually in relationship, usually with family, usually to do with the body, etc., etc. Yeah, but that old self, you know, it has to die in effect. It's not a real death, of course. You know, it's an existential death. It's a death of the emotional one. It's a death of all, you know, this tight, you know, fearful one that creates a barrier between us and the world. Yeah, so it's like the world, the false self, and the real self is kind of lurking somewhere hidden in here. You know, these are all metaphors in a way, but it's quite good one. You know, there is the world, there is the false self. Yeah, the one that we've created or has been created within us in order to navigate life, navigate reality, and then behind this is us, the raw one, the little one, the frightened one, the innocent one, the one who, yeah, the one who still exists and actually is love itself. You know, is the one that we're trying to kind of encourage to come forward, to live a life where it doesn't need this intermediary. It doesn't need the intermediary of the constructed self. Yeah, of course it still goes about its business in life. We still have to use the personality. A personality is still existent. You can see me, you know, I'm still exactly the same as I ever was. It's just that there's no phoniness now. There's no falseness kind of being worn. It's a direct relationship that I'm having with my experience, with the world, with you, with this. Yeah, there is no false self in that sense left. It's not magic, it's not enlightenment, it's just natural. It's a natural way of being in the world. But as I'm saying, that's a gradual path. There is just a gradual dissolution, yeah, and it's painful because everything that the false self was built on has to go. It has to go. There's no compromise in that. There can't be any compromise in that. Yeah, because as long as there's a compromise, there's still this little thing, and it will rebuild from the little part of us that's still, yeah, is still kind of hiding. And so it all has to come down, and that's easier said than done. Yeah, but if there's any work, that's the work. You know, it's not work towards an end. It's not working so you can get the thesis. It's not college work. It's not school work. It's not work. It is inner work. It has a different quality, has a different flavour. It has a different texture. It's not work towards an end result, towards some kind of pension of enlightenment or transformation. It's work because it must be done now, here, in this moment, today, in whatever way that we're being called to. There's a natural intelligence within us, and it says you've got to do this. You know, if there's something rising up in the body or in the body armoring or the subtle energy body or in the body, you know, or emotions that are really stuck, yeah, and you know, there's an insight that you have, and that might need to be dealt with. Yeah, that's what I mean about it can get hot and it can get nasty. Nasty is not the right word. It can get sweaty. It can get difficult. You know, it can get really kind of, you know, dig at, you know, do we really want this? Do we really, you know, want to... It asks us the question. Transformation asks us a very deep question over and over and over again. What do you really want? What do you really want in your heart? Do you want freedom of taking off the mask? Do you want the freedom of coming out from behind the false self that you've built necessarily in the world? Do you really want that? Because if you really want that, you're going to have to work bloody hard to get it. Yeah, you're going to have to, you know, meet yourself again and again and again. And it's going to hurt. There are going to be tears, yeah. But there's, you know, the juice of letting go Yeah, the juice of the freedom of letting go is worth any amount of struggle. That is my honest testament to what this is about and how worth it is, because it brings us into, you know, a real union, a real naturalness, a real kind of freedom. We're no longer living behind a curtain, living behind a mask. I mean, that's not what we're here for, right? That is not what we're here for. It happens, and it happens as part of the human experience. That's what it seems like. It happens because it happens. It happens because that's the human journey. It happens because it has to happen. Nobody knows why it happens. You know, we just don't seem to be born into the garden of innocence, and we just stay there. You know, and we all live happily in our nakedness, and there's no shame, and there's no guilt, and there's no tree, and there's no serpent, and there's no temptation, and there's no, you know, there's no violence, there's no abuse, there's no nothing. You know, that's just us being born into the garden and staying in the garden, you know, and there's such a beauty in that, but that's not really what happens. You know, what happens, and I'm not a particularly religious person, but that metaphor of the garden really has always spoken to me. What happens is that we're born into the garden. If we're lucky, we have a short time in life when we're young. We experience the innocence and the joy and the boundlessness and the, yeah, and all this kind of, you know, certain freedom, you know, of beingness. And then it starts, and then the conditioning starts, and then the contractual nature of life starts, and we start to become someone, and we start to form, and we start to develop strategies, and we start to develop all sorts of boundaries, and we, you know, not necessarily good ones, but necessary ones. We start to develop all sorts of defensive structures, and then bad things happen to us, and abuses happen to us, and wounds happen to us, and we develop shame, and we develop self-worth issues, and we start to develop belief systems based on our experience and based on the conditioning that we've been fed. You know, that's what really happens, and pretty much by and by we forget all about the innocence that we were born into. A human experience has all gone, almost as if dead. Yeah, that's the human experience. That's what happens. And then we live life as, oh, I've got to be somebody, or I'm a worm, or I'm not worthless. I want to be somebody, and we live behind this kind of thing and assume the identity of who we think we are, and we go about life in that way, from that place. But all the time, there's a discomfort. There's a discomfort, because that's, for many of us, or maybe for all of us, who knows, that's not what we're really born for. You know, we're not just born for the fame, for the money, for the struggle, or even for the family. We're not born for those. We're not born for the addiction. We're not born for all those things. They're things that we do in order to get by in our human experience, to survive the human experience, because God knows it's painful. Yeah, I'm certainly not disputing the amount of pain, but pain is not optional. You know, suffering, well, we have a say to the degree that we suffer in our pain. We have a say in that. And part of this that I bring to the table, you know, is to actually come to terms with the pain and not turn it into suffering of anything to do with poor me, or I can't cope, or it's all gone wrong, or there's too much shame, or any of this kind of stuff. There's something about being able to realize our divinity in the whole journey, and to reclaim some part of us that is still in the garden. Yeah, some part of our innocence that is still in the garden of the beloved. Yeah, this is not to do with God, this is to do with us. Yeah, and to strip away the false layers of shame or self-worth or aggrandizement or any of this kind of stuff, and just to remember a little bit that what we're here for is to remember just enough to remember that we're innocent and we're pure and we're clear vessels of light that have become muddied, that have become shadowed, that have become veiled. We are clear vessels of light. We don't need anybody to give us our divine authority because it's innate in us. Yeah, and it cannot be taken away. It can appear to be taken away, and it can appear to be veiled and compromised. But it's gone nowhere. We've gone somewhere. And this is a profound invitation, not my profound invitation, but this is the profound invitation of life, to remember something true about ourselves and to turn all attention always, if it calls you. If it doesn't call you, it doesn't matter. If something else calls you. But if it calls you, to leave no stone unturned in the devotion and dedication to transformation, to meet pain, to meet the wounds, to meet the whole lot, the whole disaster, everything about it, and to be prepared for blood, sweat and tears, and to never give up that, not because of a final destination, but because that soul calling is what's calling each of us on the path. Yeah, to not be subject to the mask wearing anymore. Yeah, to see what we can do, to devote again and again and again and again and over and over and over. And by, we don't reach a destination, we just become lighter. And we have to go through tears on the way to getting lighter. Something starts to change. The light starts to grow brighter. Yeah, the darkness starts to, recede a little bit. Sort of starts to dissolve, doesn't have as much, doesn't have as much traction, doesn't have as much darkness in it. Sort of fades, and a breakthrough happens, and then the darkness happens. Life, healing, maybe even this awakening thing that we're talking about doesn't go in a linear fashion. Mind might go in a linear fashion, and most of the world goes in a linear fashion, but healing does not go in a linear fashion. It goes around, in a spiral. And for all that we want it to go in a linear fashion, and I can testify to this because of my own personal healing journey, healing illness journey, where I desperately wanted it to go in a linear fashion, and it didn't. So I got better, and then I get worse. Yeah, I'll get better, and then it will get worse again, and I have to meet myself on an ever deeper level. Because the thing is, if you're going round, you're going to go meeting yourself on, and meeting life, and meeting your pain on ever deeper levels. Yeah, and it seems to get tougher, but it's not getting tougher. It's just darker before the dawn. Yeah, there's more courage in most people than they realise. There was more courage in me than I realised. I was a weed. When back in my 20s, I was like nothing. There was no warrior in me. It was latent. It was somewhere within me, of course, but it was somewhere in everybody. It's a struggle. It's a struggle, yeah. And that, when the what is it? The pupa, becomes the butterfly. It's a struggle. when the snake sheds its old skin, it's a struggle. Yeah, rebirth is a struggle. There's a fire. It's a struggle, and I'm not labouring the struggle. I've said struggle enough times now. I'm just, saying, if you are stuck, don't worry. Yeah, include everything. Stuck. We get stuck for reasons. We get stuck for reasons, and life calls us again and again and again. We don't rest on our laurels and just say, yeah, whatever, or it's too difficult, I can't do it. There's no such thing. Yeah? Life forges us, not because we're going to become a great warrior, but because the forging is the journey. The journey is the forging. The journey is this. Yeah? The journey is what happens today to you and to me. How do I meet life in this moment? How do I meet my own experience in this moment, and in this moment, and in this moment, forever, until I pass, until I disappear, until I dissolve? That's the constant meeting with what is, to the extent that we can. An ever unfolding movement of life, and sometimes it's a struggle. Who cares? Yeah, be devoted to the journey. Yeah, honour yourself this much. Yeah, honour yourself this much, and then see what happens. I've talked enough. I thank you so much for listening. Bye bye. Have a good day.